Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video we're going to be looking at the second book in Tamora Pierce's The Circle Opens quartet. Now, this book is not going to make much sense if you have not seen my Circle of Magic quartet, which I did back in September. Check that out. That's where you get the introduction to these characters. Also check out, I did a film review or book review of Magic Steps, which is actually the first book in this series. You don't necessarily have to read these guys entirely in order as opposed to the Circle of Magic quartet, just because it's four completely separate stories, because the main characters have separated. So, but again, I'm doing them in order because that's how I read them and they're interesting. So we're going to get to this book. So this is Street Magic. This is Briar's story. He was the street rat from the first series. He's the green mage. So he's gone off on a journey with his teacher, Rosethorn, and they are stopped off in this city of, I'm going to mispronounce this, probably, Shamir. So they are on the eastern border of Soat, which is where he is originally from. So they are, this city is very much, I'm trying to think, it's very Middle Eastern. So that's kind of where they're at. They're actually on their way to the city of Yangjing. I'm mispronounced, which again is very, very Asian. So this is kind of where they're at. They're the best kind of description I can have where she's getting some of these cultures is around Afghanistan-ish mixture of India, kind of in that between the Arab world and the Asian world, kind of in that middle area. That's kind of where you get where this stuff is taking from place. You have a lot of people live, their roofs are second living spaces here. So in this story, Briar and Rosethorn have stopped off there to help with the Earth Temple and refreshing and replacing some of their herbal medicines. And Sean, that's a little bit what he's doing. She's actually helping the farmers. That's what Rosethorn is mostly doing. She's helping them deal with a drought. And basically that's why they've stopped off there. So they're staying longer than they really expected. So one day, Briar is roaming some of the, what is the terminology here? And it gets, let's see, where on earth is it? Basically the marketplaces. Let's see, the bazaars. So that's kind of where he's at, and he goes to one of the greater ones. And first before he enters, they ask to see his hands. Now in these worlds, even in Soat, which is where he grew, thieves were marked with crosses on the kind of right here on their hands. And he did in fact have two of them, but he got sick of essentially being turned away or followed in places. So he used Rosethorn's, or I think Saundry's dyes to try to tattoo something on his hand. One tiny problem. He's a green mage. These were plant dyes, and essentially he has a growing garden all over his arms. So basically he has a living tattoo. So when he shows his hands, they just kind of start staring because things move. So that's what's really that's on his hands. So he hid those things in order to hide that he was in fact a thief. So he goes in and he sees this young girl, and she's at a stone mage's, or not basically a gem dealer's, and she's polishing these stones, and he sees magic. All of them do. And he realizes that by her polishing those stones, she's actually putting some magic into them and making them more expensive, essentially. And the guy who is running the stall knows this, and he just doesn't say anything. Not because he doesn't like her, but because she's a street rat similar to him, though they use a different term because they eat rats in this city. So essentially she was similar to him. She lives on the street. This is a very closest, this might be similar to Afghanistan in terrain, so to speak, because they're up kind of in the volcanic mountains, or possibly even Nepal. Or Kazakhstan. That's kind of the area there that she's pulling from here. So it's very volcanic. There's a lot of volcanic rocks. So he sees this. He tries to talk to her. She runs off. He's able to use plants to follow her. Now, throughout this town, there are various street gangs, and they're competing. And you interact with, and this is important, where there's a specific gang that's being run essentially by a noblewoman. And so she gets word of this young girl and realizes that Briar is teaching her because she's a stone mage. So he follows her, talks to her. She has a bunch of cats hiding basically in the poorer areas. She's young. She was sold as a slave because she's, obviously you can see the kind of picture. She's very almost Chinese looking in that sense. Her family, because she was a girl and there were too many mouths to feed, and they were traveling, she was sold. And I think she escaped. And that's how she ended up here, a poor girl, living in Princess Heights, I think, those are areas. Some of the areas have been collapsed because it's volcanic rock and rock moves. So she's kind of living in a little hovel there with a bunch of cats. And he follows her, and he has to try to convince her. It's like, I need to teach you. So he eventually gets her to come and follow him, and kind of coaxes her slowly so he can teach her. She gets in a little bit of trouble. And similar to Saundry in the previous book, Rosethorn does in fact say, you have to teach her until you can find a stone mage. So he actually goes to find there's only one stone mage, because he's in the entire city, because he chased everybody off. He goes to talk to him, and basically the guy says, like, I'm not gonna have anything to do with her. She's competition for me. I'm not gonna teach her. And it's like, it doesn't matter about your massive fancy council and where I took my learning. And yeah, so Briar comes back, tells Rosethorn. Rosethorn gets mad and goes and deals with him. So, yeah, you don't piss off Rosethorn, because she's actually a member like Lark of that council, and I'm not sure what she does. She doesn't exactly explain what she does, but he's like, he'll teach her now. And so Briar takes the girl. What is her name? If I can find her name here. It's been a while. Evie. It's Evie. So he gets her cleaned up and takes her to him. And she doesn't want to have anything to do with him because he's stuck up and he's essentially going to use her. And so they come back, and Rosethorn's like, yeah, I kind of guessed that was going to happen. So it's like, she can stay here. So they go in, they get her, move her out with all her cats, and move her in with them. And Briar starts, and then Rosethorn gets him a bunch of books on stone mages. So similar to Saundry, he teaches her meditation and starts teaching her about different rocks. In fact, he creates her an alphabet, because he's also teaching her to read, which is almost payback to what Triss did for him. She taught him to read, and now he's teaching this young girl. Now, in the meantime, you have these gangs going on, and this noble woman is essentially trying to take over. So she's trying to get in on the money. She's also kind of nasty, and paying these people to essentially start getting rid of the rest of the gangs in all of the city. And she realizes that Evie can make her money. And so she wants her, and she wants to coax her. So she at first realizes that she has to go through Briar. And there's a whole battle where various gangs are literally being obliterated, and then being essentially the survivors are being coaxed into working for this woman. So Briar comes to see her, this woman, and she tries to sweet talk him. Doesn't work. He's very, very suspicious of her. He doesn't necessarily want Evie going to her because he knows that she's in charge of this gang. He's figured this out because he's he's nosy, he's searching, he's talking to people. And he, having been a street rat, knows that this woman doesn't care about these kids. She's going to save herself, and it's not a safe life. And he doesn't want Evie part of a gang because he knows what that life was and what it leads to. So he's trying to protect her. And what ends up happening is this woman kidnaps Evie. Briar gets really, really ticked off. And he has a lot of magic, so he shows up, he destroys walls, he kills her. She has a mute who comes and basically garrots people. He finds corpses in her fancy gardens. And the other reason that he shows up, I forgot to mention this, he got into doing bonsai trees, and he creates basically the miniature trees that can bring health and all sorts of things, particularly since he's a green mage here, and he designs them. And so she wants one because that's what he was going to the bazaar to do. He was going to sell them. But then he gets involved in all of this, and he does end up selling some of them. That's how he runs into her, this noble woman who's, I think, the great aunt of the emperor, which is how she gets away with things. So, and that's how they meet, because he's selling his trees, and she sees Evie, realizes, I think she actually originally tries to get the stone mage who she's friends with, because bribery and patheticness, and try to convince Evie to come work with him, and they're like, no, we're fine. And so she eventually around and kidnaps Evie because she keeps trying to coax them. And Briar gets pissed off. He wants his student back. Rosethorn is not there. She's out at the farms and hasn't come back in a while. So he goes to the noblewoman's house and makes a very, very big mess because he's a very powerful green mage. And him and Rosethorn, something that they designed after the pirate attack, was these balls of seeds that do different things. They have magic potions, basically magic potion that makes them grow really fast in them. So he destroys the walls, he pretty much destroys everything. And Evie's upset, and Evie makes earthquakes. Because again, stone mage, and she's really upset. She actually makes a wall fall down. So the two of them kind of destroy this woman's house. And she commits suicide. Because of course Briar's broken in. He finds corpses. He's pretty much killed her two strong men, and everything's coming apart. So Briar goes and finds her, and she's committed suicide by poison. Actually, not a very efficient poison. He makes a note of that. It's like, yeah, she may look peaceful, but this was painful. And then of course the cops show up, and it's like, we can't get in because essentially he put so much magic into the place, and all the plants came alive. And yeah, and they apparently try to take it down. It just grows back faster. So he gets Evie. He goes back. Rosethorn comes back. Briar's exhausted, and she kind of cleans herself up, goes and sees what he did, and like, yep, he was pissed. This is what they do. And now they're afraid of him. And shortly thereafter, the emperor puts them up somewhere else because he wants them gone. Because it's like, Briar's scary and Rosethorn's his teacher, so it's like, go away. Just get out of my city as quickly as possible. And I think that's where they are at when Rosethorn gets there. She's like, why the heck did you move here? It's like, yeah, we were put up by the emperor because he's terrified of Briar and Evie, because Evie makes earthquakes because of rocks. And so she's a stone mage. And so Rosethorn cleans herself up, sees what he does. It's like, yeah. And then they, along with all the cats, they move on to Yangjing. So the point of the rest of this story is Evie coming into her own magic, and Briar, realizing he can be very protective of people, and to becoming an adult, becoming a teacher, similar to Sandri's story. And that is very much the point of all four of these books, is each one of them becomes a teacher. And to say they take on a student, because Deja actually takes on two. So, and essentially there's murder in all of them, and mayhem. So that's kind of the point of this. Briar becomes a teacher. Little Evie takes on essentially becoming a stone mage and bonding with Briar and Rosethorn, who she stays with. And then they head to the city of Yangjing. Yeah, that's not a good direction. What happens to them actually is covered in the book Battle Magic, if that's going to give you a clue. So Briar touches on it a little bit in the Will of the Empress. I will probably cover at least the Will of the Empress. I might cover the other ones, because Evie actually has an entire story in a book called Melting Stones. So I will cover those at a later date. But that is this book. Similar to Magic Steps, they're not very long. These are actually a tad bit longer than the Circle of Magic, because their target audience is a tad bit older. And this is just the final four. 296, roughly. Is that it? Yeah. Trying to make sure. She has an appendix in the back that gives you pronunciations. Yeah. Just about 292 plus a little. So that's the paperback version of this book. So great book. Again, I enjoy it. Similar to the Magic Steps. So of course I love Magic Steps more. A lot of mineral information. If you have Rockhound kids, might like the fantasy of this. So that's it for this review. I will finish. This is the second. I have the last two books I have in my hands. Cold Fire and Shattered Glass are the next two books, so I will cover those. Be sure to check out, if you haven't, my Circle of Magic reviews. Check out the Native American stuff I have going on. If you like this, that's a little bit on the heavier side. I have a bunch of other reviews if you want to check them out. Book reviews, family film reviews, a little bit of child travel travel videos, and some secular homeschooling videos as well, and a lot more to come. Thank you.